just to start us off, we decided to host this discussion, Understanding Homelessness, because as an organization, VOA has been providing housing and services to our region for several decades. We know what works and what doesn't work. And like you, we see that homelessness is growing, not just in our urban areas, but also in our suburbs. But before we provide effective solutions, we need to understand the root causes. Most of us have heard of the concept design thinking. That's when you ask your customer for what they want instead of designing something that you think they want, and then the product doesn't sell. For social services, it's very similar. For services to be effective, they need to be offered at the right time, make them feel safe, and the services need to be wanted by the participant. Otherwise, they're not going to be effective. All of our panelists today have extensive experience with homelessness. They are the real experts when it comes to understanding the root causes, the shame, and the trauma that keeps them there, and some of the paths out. We are all unique individuals. We are made up of life experiences. This forms our thoughts and our attitudes. Our friends and neighbors who experience homelessness, addiction, and mental health are also unique. They come from different backgrounds, different family dynamics, and a variety of traumas. Therefore, a personalized approach is needed to guide someone from homelessness to independence when they are ready. Thank you again for joining us. We're thrilled to have so many people that were interested in this topic and really want to take the time to better understand what someone faces. My name is Christy Holderegger. I'm the Vice President, Chief Development Officer for Volunteers of America, Northern California and Northern Nevada. And I'm so pleased that we have so many of our friends from both of our regions joining us for this very unique conversation around homelessness. I'd like to introduce all of our panelists, and then we'll start asking them some of the questions that you've submitted over the last week. First of all, we have Nick Himphil. Nick is the co-owner and president of Himphil Electric and is vice chair of Volunteers of America's Northern California and Northern Nevada Board of Directors. He has served on the board of directors for 6 years and has brought a unique perspective to our leadership. Nick was introduced to drugs through his family's use at the age of 12. Looking for direction, Nick joined the Navy at 18, left the military after a short stint. As his addiction escalated, he eventually became homeless. Through Volunteers of America, Nick found sobriety and the skills he needed to rebuild his life. Today, both Nick and his wife, Jill, have 19 years of sobriety. They are successful business owners, sponsor other individuals struggling with addiction, and continue to give back to their community. Next, we have Jill Himphil. Jill is the office manager of Himphil Electric. Her addiction began at the age of 11, when her mother passed away and her father had just returned from serving in Vietnam. He struggled with the loss of his wife. After being bounced around to different family members, she found drugs to deaden the pain and the abandonment she felt. So Jill is an advocate for recovery programs and services that build trust. Don't just judge you, but offer you the solutions to heal from past trauma and guide you to independence. Next, our panelist, Anna Cornelius, is the senior support staff at the VOA Family Shelter. Anna grew up in a chaotic home filled with alcoholism, verbal, and physical abuse. Stints of homelessness began at the age of 14 when her mother kicked her out. Anna was taught from an early age that what happens at home stays in the home. Anna tried her best to care for herself by going to school and working. At the age of 29, Anna succumbed to addiction to numb her pain and isolation. By the age of 33, she was homeless. But through a caring and compassionate sponsor, fellowship, a loving support group, and reconnecting with her Christian family, she found transitional housing and a way to share the trauma she had experienced and begin to heal. Today, she is celebrating 14 years of sobriety and has 2 beautiful 17-year-old daughters. Next, we have Pat Cushell. Pat is the regional director for VOA in Northern Nevada. Son of the late Mayor Bob Cushell, Pat understands how addiction not only impacts the individual, but devastates the family. Despite growing up in a loving and compassionate family with all the resources available to achieve success, Pat spent 10 years homeless and addicted to meth. Today is celebrating 16 years of sobriety and sees the potential in each and every client that walks through the VOA doors. Next but not last, or at least, is Leo McFarland, President and CEO of VOA Northern California and Northern Nevada. He has devoted 47 years to understanding homelessness, learning from those who have lived experiences, and developing the programs that build trust and guide individuals to self-sufficiency and independence. Leo believes that anyone can be housed if they have time to heal from past trauma and are provided the skills to rebuild their lives. It all begins with love and dignity. So next, we are going to ask each of our panelists some of the questions that we have received over the past couple of weeks. Please use the chat to add additional questions for our panelists, and as time allows, we will pose your questions as well. So first question, we see people on the streets and we wonder, why are they there? In your experience, what are the causes of homelessness? Nick and Jill, could you lead us off?
Yeah. For as being homeless, it was for me was just trauma, addiction, and then of course mental. When you're in that state, you become. I believe that mental has a lot to do with it. And then when you do see people on the streets, it's all in the same basket, because you don't know how to live. You're on drugs, or it all goes the same way, so.
Yeah, I'd like to add a little bit to that. First of all, thank you everybody for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us in a day of understanding why people are homeless. The people on the panel, except for Leo, of course, have all experienced homelessness. And in my opinion, there's a lot of different reasons why people end up on the streets. For myself, it was drug addiction. As Jill is speaking to, there's also mental health issues that go on. And through my journey out there, I ran into people who simply lost their income and could no longer afford to pay the rent and the bills that were, tossed on them. So they ended up living in their cars, kind of like the hidden homeless. So there's many different reasons why people end up homeless. I would say for every person out there, there's a different reason. So as many people that are homeless, there are that many reasons. Thank you.
Thanks, Nick. Pat, would you like to add to that? In your experience, what are the causes of homelessness?
I go back to what Nick just said, is as many people as we have out there as homeless. That's how many reasons we have for being homeless. So it's not one size fits all. So for me, it was drug addiction. But I believe drug addiction was just a byproduct of mental health issues that I had that I didn't recognize or went untreated. And so for me, drug addiction and mental health definitely play a role in everybody's reason for being homeless. I'm not everybody, but mainly mental health. But at the end of the day, like Nick said, as many people we have out there being homeless, that's how many reasons we have. And every individual is unique and needs to be addressed in that unique fashion.
Thanks, Pat. Anna, how would you answer that question?
Well, hello everyone. I totally agree with Pat and Nick. There is many. For me, there was childhood trauma attached to it. And then there was some misinformed information attached to it because I was, all of my problems stemmed from childhood and carried on into my adulthood. There's so many, and I agree as many as people are out there, because you got childhood trauma, mental health, drug abuse, you got not knowing how to live on your own, never being taught. Some people never been taught how to live on their own. There's many.
Thanks, Anna. Can I ask each one of the panelists, Nick and Jill and Pat and Anna, how did your addiction begin? Nick and Jill, do you want to start us off?
Go ahead, Jill.
So my addiction began probably, it started out with cigarettes at 11. And it just progressed. I went to weed, then I went to drinking, and then to crank, and it just progressed and it just kept going. And at that time, you know, I didn't know how to stop, you know, and so it just kept going till I woke up one day and looked at Nick and said, I'm gonna call the program that his brother told us about, which was VOA. And I said, I'm leaving. And I don't know how that happened, divine intervention, but it was the best thing that ever happened. So
For myself, it was through my family's use. It's you could say drugs and alcohol were as prevalent in my house as milk and eggs. So it was there. It was normal. It was a normal thing to do. I was a kid in high school that didn't want to see the party end. Everybody would be drinking. I'd be finding ways to find other parties and other things to do, and it just progressed from that point. It got to a point where I never can figure out where it became a way of life rather than recreational, but it did. It changed, and at that point, I lost control and couldn't manage my own life, and so it progressed to a point to where I ended up homeless.
Thanks, Nick. Anna?
Well, mine began, well, I never felt a part of anything, even as a child. I was always felt neglected and not a part of as a child. So when I first tried it, it was snuck on me by a boyfriend, and I was trying to fit in with him. I was trying to smoke some marijuana with him, and he put some added in it. And it wasn't until later that I realized I started wanting it when I was in pain. So I was numbing myself with it.
Thanks, Anna. Pat?
I'd have to say young and dumb. Just not knowing what I was doing, thought it was the cool thing to do. And little did I know I had this little demon inside me called addiction. And I flipped that switch. And that switch got flipped, and I couldn't, it was like a runaway train, and I just couldn't stop. Not to say I didn't want to stop. I tried many times, but it's just such a, for me, my drug of choice was methamphetamines, and it's such a powerful, powerful drug. And it dictated everything I did in life. Whether I left my house when I had a house, whether I got up that day, whether I went to work that day, which I wasn't functioning. But yeah, I would just say I was young and naive and made some bad decisions. And little did I know that addiction switch got flipped, and I was off and running.
Thanks, Pat. Okay, our next question is, what is a daily experience of being homeless? Because I think a lot of people that don't know anything about homelessness, they think they want to be homeless, that it's, carefree, they have no responsibilities, they don't have to answer to anybody. Anna, can you start us off with what the daily experience is like being homeless?
Yes, it was very painful having to hustle every day, try to figure out where can I sleep, where can I eat, if I'm going to eat, if I'm going to bed. I had to appear intimidating in order to survive because I was a woman out there in the streets, and it was very painful. So I had the days of very painful, feeling like I don't belong. The air that I'm breathing is not mine. It was a lot of work. It was a lot of work, and it was a lot of challenges and a lot of struggles.
Thank you. Jill and Nick, how would you answer that?
Kind of the same way Anna just answered it. Being homeless and a daily struggle. For myself, it was, like we say in the rooms, finding ways and means to get more. It would start off in the morning with me trying to find something to eat for Jill and I. And then at that point, my mission continued into trying to find ways to get money for my next fix. And how I did that was most of the time I was stealing scrap metal. So I had this little bike I had with a basket behind it that I used to ride around town, and anything I could find that I could throw in that basket that I could later scrap and turn in for money, I would. So if you can imagine how that goes, there were times I'd be coming home at 5 or 6 in the morning as the sun's coming up and watching other cars go down the street, and I'd kind of chuckle and laugh at them because those were the people who had to work. Later today, I realized that I was working a 24-hour job trying to support our habit for both myself and Jill. And those people got breaks, they got lunches, they got to go home at the end of the day and enjoy the rest of their evening, when that didn't happen for us because being homeless is a 24-hour a day job. And Jill echoes that point.
Thank you. Pat, what's the daily experience of being homeless in Nevada?
Whenever you ask this question, or whenever I get asked this question, the first thing that comes to my mind is exhausting. It's exhausting, and it's not an easy way of life. And the guilt and the shame also, walking through town or around the streets and feeling like everybody's staring at you or looking at you, and just we beat ourselves up enough as addicts, and then to I don't know, just the experience on the street is just brutal. And what a homeless individual goes through every day speaks volumes to just how, I don't know, I guess I look at it differently, just how strong they actually are to be able to survive, and not just survive on the streets, but to be able to survive the trauma that they've experienced throughout their life. And that's why I hold on to hope for every client that I deal with, that I know they have the strength within them to survive on the streets. I know they have the strength within them, not just survive on the streets, but like I said, the trauma they've experienced in their life as kids. I know they have the strength within them to pull themselves out of this and have a beautiful life.
Thank you, Pat. Our next question is for Pat again, if you want to start this off. Many people believe that homelessness is a choice. In fact, we hear the statistics that 50% of those who are homeless who are offered housing don't want it. Why do you think that is?
For me, I can speak about my experience. It wasn't a choice for me. I always tell people I didn't, as a young child, I never dreamed that I can't wait to get out there on the streets and be homeless. It just was never a dream of mine ever. And I made really bad choices, and I paid the price for those bad choices. And those, those were my consequences, where I ended up on the street homeless. And I came from a really good family, a really good life. And I don't know. I don't see that. And I understand that there is housing that we offer to individuals, but it's a process. Not everyone just goes from being homeless to entering into a house, and if they're choosing not to be in a house, then there's some underlying issues that we need to deal with to help them understand that to get to that place where they can be productive and be successful in their house. And so and I'm sure we'll talk about case management here eventually, but it speaks volumes about the need for case management to help figure out what these underlying issues are and why they would choose to be on the streets and not be in a safe, loving home. So I think the underlying issues are what nobody chooses to be homeless. There's always a reason for this, and it's part of our job to figure out what that reason is.
Pat, you mentioned case management. Why don't you explain what case management is to our audience and why it's so important to have it? Because we all hear about housing first, and let's give everybody a home. It's like we want to keep people safe off the street, warm, and so let's get them into housing. But what's that other component that's so critical, would you say?
I can't talk enough about case management. It's the meat and potatoes of, at least of our shelter, to find success. And case managers are all of the employees of Volunteers of America are angels. Let me just set that straight. But the important role that case managers play is figuring out, I guess, one, in the beginning, is just simply to build trust. Living on the streets and as an addict, I didn't trust anybody. And the individuals have been dealt the worst card worst hand of cards that ever since they were young. And so their level of trust of anybody. And so it's really important for that case manager to build the trust to move forward. But case management is just such an important role at the shelter. They do everything from diversion to identifying maybe sources of income to other family members to resources in the community that individuals will need in order to achieve success. It's just I can't stress enough, and we're just the importance that a case manager plays in the success of an individual that comes to our shelters.
Thank you. I think that's really important to remember. And Nick, I wanted to ask you a question. You mentioned this the other day about what was keeping you from going into the shelter, or why did you step in the shelter that first day?
I'd like to say that I was introduced to Volunteers of America, and what that really looked like is I was dropped off at the shelters. The person I used to buy drugs from got tired of me living in his backyard in the tent and jumping over his fence at 2, 3, 4 in the morning with stuff that I was banging on his door to try to sell him. They eventually got to a point where, like Jill spoke about, she wanted to get some help. She was looking for a way out, and she can no longer live that way. I had a different opinion, but I followed her anyways, since I had nothing better to do. We got kicked out of that place. They dropped us off at the shelters. I was looking for a place to stay for 30 days, maybe get off the streets, get some food, get a respite. But what ended up happening was a whole different story. So are you asking what my journey out of homelessness is right now, or do you just want me to say?
No, I just, you had mentioned you went in just to kind of get some respite.
Yeah.
That wasn't the long-term plan. And you had a different idea. There was a reason why you couldn't get off the street, because you had to take care of Jill. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I lived in constant fear. The police was a real fear for me, because I'm living on the streets with my wife. And as Anna said, women are victims on the streets oftentimes. So my biggest fear was getting arrested and ending up in jail and leaving Jill on the streets by herself. So when we got to the shelters, although Jill wanted help, I wanted a place to stay because I couldn't move forward in their programs. I had 39 charges pending on me when I first landed in the shelters. And for me, turning myself in meant going to jail, which meant leaving Jill on the streets by herself. And that's not something, that's kind of where I start to get emotional, because that was a turning point in our lives. The panelists have spoken about the trust that needs to be built between case management and the people who are coming into the programs. People of Volunteers of America gained my trust and convinced me that I needed to move forward and take care of these things. I was actually holding us back from progressing in our programs rather than helping. So it was laid out in front of me that Jill could continue her program. I could take care of my court issues. We can move forward, and they gained my trust, so I believed them, and that's what ended up happening.
Thank you for sharing that. We had a question came in from the chat that I wanted to read, and anybody can answer it. It says, can you discuss the differences in today's situation that has multiplied homelessness to the extent that we see? My impression is that the bar to homelessness has been lowered. It isn't just drugs, mental and unusually traumatic events now. Is that true? So is it the lack of housing? Is it other factors? What would you say?
Well, from what I understand and what I see is, homelessness. Okay, so the programs that we went to, we brought them into a program. We had case managers. We had, whatever we needed, and to get, be productive members of society. Right now, they put people in places just to put them there, and there's nothing for them to get help from. And so what happens is they leave because, of course, that's what they do. They go out and look for drugs or whatever they're doing, and they have no more home again. So as people become homeless and get a little taste of like in a little apartment and then leave, they start losing more and more trust. Then there's going to be, you can't just put someone in an apartment or a home and say, okay, there you go. You're not giving them anything to work for. So they're going to stay that way, and they're going to get more angry, and they're going to use more drugs, and they're going to have more distrust. So
Lack of services.
lack of services. I mean, if we want to help the homeless and the addicts, we have to have something to help them with.
Thank you. Pat, do you have anything to add to that with kind of your own experience during your homelessness and your addiction and having little stints of housing? You kind of talked about that you think your dad kind of was the first pioneer.
He was. I think I was the first, the pilot program for Housing First, and it didn't turn out well for me. At least my Housing First program didn't turn out well for me. I definitely didn't have the wraparound services of case management. My dad paid for my rent. I had everything. I mean, seriously, it was a Housing First model that my dad used without knowing that. And I ended up, my house became, when I had a house, became the party house. It just really, that's why I keep going back to the wraparound services and case management, just what an important role it is in helping people achieve success. And I didn't have any of that. I just simply had a house. I simply had a roof, which was really important. It kept me safe. My dad could sleep at night. My mom could sleep at night, at least thinking that I was safe and in a warm house, but they had no idea what was going on inside that house. So I'm not, me personally, not a huge fan of Housing First unless you have really, really extensive wraparound services, and which is really expensive for a community. But yeah, I just my pilot program that so, yeah, but I can say when you brought up other reasons for homeless, and I'll always default back to mental health as being one of the root causes of homelessness. But if you were to look at other factors, I would definitely here in the Reno area. I just read an article before we got on the Zoom call. Our average rent has gone from, in the last 2 years, from $890 average rent to $1,400 just over the last year or two. And so I think that's definitely playing a role in homelessness. But I'll always, from what just my experience, I'm going to go all the way back to childhood trauma. And I think childhood trauma plays such a significant role in all of this and what we're dealing with in the world today.
Thanks, Pat.
Hi.
Yeah, Anna.
You know, there's a couple of things. Hi. There's a couple of things I want to hit on. You know, for me, homelessness for me was not a choice. Like I said before, I was supposed to be that runway model, fashion designer in my own clothing. You know that I designed. But there is a lot of things that go together with homelessness. I mean, there's so many different reasons to be homeless. Like as of right now, I see people homeless that has jobs, you know, or evictions that they can't get housed. It's more than just addiction today. It's more than just mental health. It's a little bit of everything. Each individual has their individual story. So in order to get to the bottom line of this homelessness, we have to do individually and build some kind of trust with the person that is homeless. Because for me, it didn't begin until I trusted someone.
And you know, I wanted to follow up on that. Would you also say that there needs to be a unique plan for each individual, because they're all different, right? And we hear, you know, this kind of the spectrum of homelessness. You have individuals that have had 3, 5, 10 years of addiction and homelessness that maybe Housing First wouldn't work for them. They need more services, right? And then you have those that, because rent is so high, and they may have just lost their job, or they're escaping from domestic violence or some other traumatic event, they fall into homelessness, and maybe Housing First is more appropriate for them because they just need some lighter services and they can be rapidly rehoused. Have you seen individuals at the family shelter that kind of fit that example?
I actually have. There's some people that come in and they get housed really quickly. And some of them do the footwork really quickly on their own. And then you have some that need guidance, but they have to build a relationship. And that's another reason they call me Mama Anna. I don't know. But and building a relationship does not mean I'm hanging out with them. It means that they trust me enough to tell me their story. And I have to hold that story and not tell anyone else. And then that way I can open up and help them help themselves.
Great, thank you.
Christy, can I pipe in on a question that I saw in the chat room? Somebody asked a question that I hear all the time. And for me, it's why did we see this explosion of homelessness? And it really isn't pandemic era explosion. It was an explosion that's happened over the last 4 or 5, 6, 7 years. If you think about it, you can't drive down the street, whether it's in Reno or whether it's in Sacramento, to see people camping out on sidewalks and the like. And there's a number of reasons for this. And and it's very complex. It's multifaceted, but it really starts at the federal level, where the federal government has changed its policies that reflect across the country in terms of how they spend their dollars. And in adjoining that would be various changes in the law that prevent law enforcement from being more engaged with that population, the homeless population, to help advance them into program services. We know what programs work. We know we've designed and implemented programs that have been very, very successful, moving thousands of homeless out of homelessness into independence. Our Mather Community Campus was one of those programs, operating for nearly 25 years in Sacramento, that moved just under 5,000 people through the Mather program successfully out of homelessness, with only a 3% recidivism rate. Only 3% of the people who graduated the Mather program failed at that success. That was a national model and remarkable program. But funding changes. Funding moved away from that program into something else. And so when we hit a recession, funding disappears and good programs disappear. When times are good, new programs, new concepts are developed. So that's the ever-changing shift in the ground in terms of how dollars flow to address this issue. So right now, the current model of choice is a housing first model. It can work for some. And Anna just spoke about the family that is at the family shelter who just needed that help to get back on their feet. Rapid rehousing, where people who financially are strapped, we have resources to catch up on their past bills and maybe get them the kind of money to extend their housing for another 6 months to 9 months and stabilize that family so they don't become homeless. But the typical person you see on the street that in some cases frighten people, some cases they're in your doorway if you're running a business. Those folks are what you've been hearing about so far this morning. People who are suffering with mental illness, with addiction issues, and there are successful programs, but those aren't being funded the way they really should be, the way historically they were. Because I've been doing this for 47 years, I've seen so many good programs live and die, because when Prop 13 hit, it changed the programs. When recessions hit, it eliminated programs. So that's going to continue to happen. We're in a time right now where the government is flowing a great deal of money into a variety of services, and we hope that it takes. But right now, with what's going on with businesses shutting down, people not working, we're seeing a different, I'll say, caliber of people entering into the homeless world. And these are the folks we really need to get out as quickly as possible, because you don't want to remain homeless for more than a year. Once you're homeless for 2 years, it's more difficult to get out. If you've been homeless for 15 or 20 or 30 years, it's a heavy lift to move them out of that situation. So as soon as we can move somebody out of their temporary condition into a more stabilized permanent condition, we can begin addressing this explosion of homelessness we see.
Thanks, Leo, for that.
Christy, can I just touch on that real quick? I want to agree with what Leo was saying. In my opinion, it's a shift to housing first model, as well as how easy it is to be homeless on the streets nowadays. I've shared with you quite a few times that if it was as easy to be homeless today as it was, or if it was as easy to be homeless back then as it is today, Jill and I may not have gotten help. I mean, if we can literally put a tent anywhere you want, we could have found a really cool place to build our little community and make a home. But back when we were on the streets, it wasn't the norm. It wasn't okay to be homeless. There were times where we were sitting under a tree in the shade, and because it was 105 degrees out, and the police would come and move us along. So, you know, with it, that kind of mentality moved us into the programs where we were able to start building relationships with people to help us. And we didn't know how to live when we first got into the shelters. We didn't know how to rebuild our lives. We'd gotten ourselves in such a mess that it was too much for me to even conceive how I was going to get out of it. I needed the wraparound services that Pat talked about in order to help me transition from living on the streets to a structured environment, and then on to another program where we can eventually be successful. So, thank you.
Nick, do you want to add on just kind of what your path out was? I mean, you've touched on it a little bit. Is there anything that you would add to that?
Absolutely. So as I spoke about, when I first got into the shelters, I was just looking for a place to sleep for a while, and I wasn't looking for any services. My path started with the staff of Volunteers of America, first gaining our trust, talking to me about what could come next and what was possible, and then fulfilling their promises. Every time there was an obstacle in front of us that they gave us suggestions to take care of, and those obstacles got taken care of, that we built more trust with the staff. It went from living on the streets to a Pathways program, which taught us to transition from living on the street to a more structured environment. Once we graduated through the Pathways program, we applied to and then got accepted to a Mather Community Campus, which was another really emotional point in my life. I could not believe that they accepted us. You know, some homeless drug addicts on the streets got accepted to this Holy Grail program, Mather. And when we got out to Mather, we were wrapped around with services. We had employment service workers, we had credit specialists to help us build our credit, we had case management, we had support staff that was there 24 hours a day. Because there were times where we had to wake up in the middle of the night and just kind of be flustered and not know what to do, and support staff would be there to support us through that time as well. Mather does so many more things than just help you with your resume. It helped me reunite with my family. It helped me, you know, like Pat was talking about what a case management does. For me, case manager is our navigator. They lay out the plan, they show us what we need, what needs to happen, and we follow up with the footwork. And through all that process, we moved out of Mather and purchased our first home. So we went from homeless to homeowner in the time from we met Volunteers of America till the time we left Volunteers of America. And now I get to sit on the board of directors.
Amazing. Thanks, Nick. That's awesome. You know, we have a couple more, we have some great questions in the chat, and I wanted to get to a couple of them before we are, the ones that we have already scheduled before we answer those. So for those who are in the audience, what is the one thing they need to remember when interfacing with those struggling with homelessness? Anna, how would you answer that?
The one thing they need to remember, I would say, is that everyone is human. For me, that stigma bothers me. Once an addict, always an addict. Once a person look at you as an addict, it's like it never goes away, and then I'm stuck. And then I'm stuck in a place where I don't want to heal. So first, remember that they're human. Everyone has their own path, their own story. We don't know how much pain is in that story, but everyone has happiness, sorrow, love, pain, and their story is their own. So just remember that they're human, and we're all searching for understanding, compassion, and love.
Thank you, Anna. I think, you know, what I always try to remember, because, you know, when you see somebody, and I've seen this a lot when I'm visiting our shelters here in Sacramento or up in Reno, and I might be walking down the street on the way to a restaurant or even to the shelter, and I might pass somebody that's appears to be homeless, and they look very unapproachable, and they look angry, and they're not making eye contact, and I'm empathetic, and I want to talk to him, but I'm a little bit scared myself. And then I'm eventually in the shelter talking to our staff, and I see that same individual. Well, now they're like, have, you know, bright eyes, and they're smiling, and they're coming up, and they're engaging, And it just reminds me that those that you see on the street, a lot of time, it's their defense mechanism, right? They have to look tough. So they're not being, and I guess that's what's really challenging. It's like, I would love, all of us to look at people past their appearance.
I actually have a story. I
Sure.
actually have a story on that. As I told you about my childhood, growing up, my mother used to, we walk with our mother in the store or whatever have you, and then you have the panhandlers begging for money, and my mother used to cuss them out. So as I became a teenager, I was finding myself doing the same thing. That was totally misinformed information, right? Get a job, that type of stuff. Again, they have their own story, their own path. But as I grew up and ended up homeless myself and was hanging out with those same people, I realized they're only human. There are the most loving and caring people in the world out there on the streets. So that's why I say, remember, they're human. They're somebody's brother, sister, auntie, uncle, child. Oh my God, I'm getting emotional. But please remember that we all came from somebody, and we all, just remember they're human and show some compassion and love. And yes, unapproachable, yes, that's a part of their story. Thank you.
Thanks, Anna. We have a number of questions, and I'm going to try to get to all of them if I can. Renee had asked, she's curious how Nick cleared the 39 citations. Did case management help with that? How did you accomplish that?
We don't know.
So yeah, well, I would say divine intervention. It was a scary time when Victoria, who was running the Pathways program at the time, had convinced me that Jill would continue in her program if I was to turn myself in and maybe end up in jail, because that was a real possibility. We went down to the courthouse to go check myself in and say, hi, I'm here and I have warrants and I need to set a court date. Well, if anybody who's been through that situation knows, they guided us to this one room. They said, enter in through that door over there, and then we'll take care of it for you. Well, we walked in that door, the door shuts behind you and locks. And Jill here starts panicking, starts getting scared. And she says, what's going to happen? I said, well, honey, I'm going to go to jail now, and you're going to continue on with your program. So I don't know how it happens, but I sat down with the lady who came in to discuss my cases with me, and she's looking through my file. And she said, I had something like 12 or 13 failure to appears. I had all these charges. She said she was going to send me a court date. And I looked at her, I said, you just told me I have all these failure to appears, but you're going to set me a court date. Why? And she said she just felt that I was going to show up this time. For whatever reason, she had that feeling, and she sent me a court date. And I showed up for that court date in Sacramento, which prompted Placer County to start inquiring about what was going on with me. And then the next intervention started, divine intervention. I had to turn myself into Placer County for a day in jail, or I had to turn myself into Sacramento County for a day to get processed to be released. And in that time, Placer County started inquiring about me, which typically Placer County takes you to jail. They don't give you any breaks. So I thought I was going to jail. I wasn't going to be allowed to go on to the Mather program, and jail was going to continue. For some unforeseen reason, they let me loose with another court date for Placer County. And so I was able to set that court date and show up to there, which the judge made a nice little comment to me when I showed up to the courthouse, saying he was going to give me the 2-hand stipulation because he had to pull my case file out with 2 hands. But they allowed me to go through DMV and prove that none of these vehicles that were part of my charges were registered to me anymore. And they were able to set community service up for me, which I was able to do while I was at Mather Community Campus. So I was able to volunteer in the community and take care of that. Drug diversions got dropped in with Mather Community Campus because Mather Community Campus at the time drug tested. So I was under a drug testing program and I was in program. So they kind of piggybacked all that stuff together. And as long as I stayed on my little island of Mather Community Campus, I didn't have to go to jail because I was fulfilling all my obligations. So it all worked out.
Thanks, Nick. And I think that's what I think for me, especially reminds me that it's really complicated to get off the street. There are so many things going on between loss of family, addiction, mental health, where do you even begin? You got, I mean, I would say what, 85% or more of those that we serve in our shelters have some kind of criminal background, because you can't be homeless and not have gotten arrested for something or cited for something. And so there's so many different things, and we see so many people walk in and they're so overwhelmed. It's overwhelming being homeless, but it's even more overwhelming to walk in because you don't have the plan in your head. All you think of is the barriers. And that's what's so wonderful about those that work in social services. It's easier for them to help your family member than the family to help their loved one, because we don't know what we don't know. And as Pat said, our staff, I mean, anybody that works in social services, they are doing it for a reason, because they care and they see potential in every single person that walks through our doors. Lots of wonderful comments. So I hope Anna and Nick and Jill, please read those comments, because there's some just wonderful comments and shout outs to you. We have another question from Ron. It says, are we hurting more than helping by giving money to those that are panhandling? Pat, Nick, why don't you answer that?
I'm sorry, I started to try to read the chats. Could you please
But
rephrase
yeah,
the
are
question?
we hurting more than helping by giving people money on the street?
Okay, so there's different philosophies on that. You are absolutely helping them do whatever they need to do to get through that day. As far as helping them get off the streets, no. What you're doing is you're providing them a little bit of relief, whether it's because they want to buy a 6-pack of beer or they want to go to McDonald's and get a 99-cent cheeseburger. Whatever it helps them get through the day, you're absolutely helping them with that. As far as getting off the streets and solving any of their issues, no, we're not.
Okay, thank you. Pat, how would you answer that?
I totally agree with what Nick said. If I can, if I have a spare couple dollars or change or $5, what they spend it on, that may be the happiest thing that happens to them all day long. And like you said, are we helping them get out of their situation? No, not really. But I might be bringing a smile to their face, or maybe they may need that beer, because I know what alcohol and the withdrawals of alcohol can kill you. And so, and that's just maybe that provides them one more day to seek the help that they need. I guess is a kind of a twisted way to look at it, but no, I don't think twice about it before I hand them an extra dollar or whatever that may be.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Here's another question from Peter. Is not how we feel about ourselves that determines our choices. If that is the root cause, how do we, as a culture, ensure our children are raised to be reflected their true value and feeling that they belong? I don't know if anybody wants to tackle that one. That's a tough one.
Well, let me see if I can tackle that. For me, the way I was raised, I had a good parent, meaning that's always there. That was my stepfather, and I had my mother that did everything opposite. And I didn't feel a part of anything. Now that I'm a mother, I learned from that. So everything that my children endure is totally different than I did. At the same time, I get to heal through them, because everything they do, whether it's the softball, which we have a game today, it's the softball field, the straight A's, I am there. I'm always on the field. I'm always there. I get to experience their joy, and I still feel mine. It heals my child, my inner child. Mm-hmm. So for me, do the opposite of what hurts you with your children.
Thank you, Anna. Mm-hmm. I know we always try to be a better parent than our parents. We try to take the good and the bad and mm-hmm. make better choices. I have to read one comment from one of our partners at Washoe County, and she said, "I'm so unbelievably grateful for everyone's shared life experiences and how to approach a homeless individual with patience, understanding, and grace. I definitely agree with the importance of the wraparound services. Providing the appropriate services is so important. Thank you." We have a question from Julie. How can churches help? I know a lot of, and Pat, you could probably address this because I know you've worked with a lot of churches that have come into our shelters, but also groups that, we have such a loving community and everybody wants to help. And so sometimes they open up, they bring food out to the different areas to provide additional meals. People want to go out to the streets and help somehow. What would you suggest is the best way for either churches or individuals to help individuals that are suffering right now?
For me, I love it. I have a lot of churches, they reach out and I encourage them to do the care packages. Because a lot of time that's just the 1 gallon sandwich bags with maybe a protein bar, personal hygiene, the toothbrush, toothpaste, a razor. And not only does it help the individual on the that's living on the street, but it also it helps our case managers maybe break the ice. It's something that we can provide to the case. It's a tool for our case managers as well. And it goes, I can't tell you how often, if we're just walking down asking questions or reaching out, a lot of times they don't want to talk to us, but when we have something to offer them and to give to them, it's maybe that it makes all the difference in that interaction that our case managers have with the person that we're trying to connect with and gain their trust. So I love it when the churches or any group, we had a large trucking company that must have made 1,000 bags for us. And those last a long time. And I can't tell you how much that helps our organization and helps the people living out on the streets.
Thanks, Pat. We have a comment from Matt, kind of a comment and a question. Matt said, it's humbling to be a part of this conversation. Thank you for advocating and doing what you do on behalf of our fellow human beings. You all are the good ones, the warriors. What are a couple of the most effective things someone like me can do to help? Be aware and loving and give donations to VOA so as to help fund all the various programs. Anything else?
I'd love it when, obviously someone writes a check, it's really nice. I know Christy likes that. So, but also I think a lot of what I love doing also is I call them friend raisers. And I love people coming down and taking tours and actually interacting with the homeless or with our clients. I like to call them clients and hearing the stories and understanding maybe some of the issues that the individuals face. So I guess that boils down to what can you do? It's offer us your time. And maybe that time is just 15 minutes or whatever you can spare, but to come down and really experience what we do, the clientele, but also to hear the stories from the employees goes a long way. And then you can write a check.
Thanks, Pat. And I think it's important there's always something that can be done, right? If financially you can't write that check, if it's sharing what you heard today, sharing with your family members, your friends, the stories, I think that's I've been with the organization for almost 30 years, and I can talk about Volunteers America until I'm blue in the face. But when our panelists are here sharing their own personal stories, it is just so much more real. And I think it opens up people's hearts. So it's like, we need more ambassadors out there. We need more advocates. We need to continue to let our leaders, our elected officials know that there has to be more, but we need more services. We need more transitional housing. So when people get stabilized in the shelters, they have that next step. Because as you've seen, all of our panelists have had different years of homelessness and addiction. And they had to go through that process. And it's, coming in one day and having the seeds planted and having somebody reach out to them and start asking, what do you need? You're the expert on you. What do you want? What do you want to see happen? And then they work with those case managers and those staff to open up doors for them and make them feel that there is hope. It's not hopeless, because I think what I've heard so much is when you're on the street, it feels hopeless and you feel like you deserve to be there. And that's what we need to change, because nobody deserves to be on the street. And when somebody is saying, no, they don't want to get housing, there's a reason why, right? It's their mental health, it's their trauma, and that they have to get through. So it's not just, I really don't believe it's a choice ever. I don't believe there's any more questions. We're right at the end. Thank you so much for joining us today. We recorded this, so we will send this out to all of our participants today, and feel free to share it. Feel to email me if you have any additional questions. I know there was a couple that I wasn't able to get to, but we are so very grateful for your time and your understanding and your compassion, because we need more people like you. So thank you, and have a great day. We're going to stay on for just a minute. Oh, also, I'm going to get in trouble if I don't mention this. We have our annual event called Shelter from the Storm. It's really Shelter from the Storms of Life that we've been doing for over 20 years. It's coming up on May 20th in Sacramento and on June 16th in Reno. And we're going to put a slide up if you would like to register. We would love to see you there. You're going to hear more stories and some of the solutions to what we discussed today. So thank you so much for joining us. Anna also put the link in the chat. So if you haven't had a chance to register yet and you'd like to, you can click on that. But again, thank you so much and have a blessed day.